Hey parents, and welcome back. June is Pride Month, and today's special guest will share with us his journey when he was a teenager discovering his sexual orientation. I'm Michal Cohen, and I empower parents to have meaningful conversations with their teenagers about relationships, safer sex, and porn exposure. So let's talk. Thank you so much, Nuno Guerreiro, for coming to this episode today. And I want to start, Nuno, by asking you, how do you identify yourself?
Sure. First, thank you, Michal, for having me. It's a pleasure, to be chatting with friends. I identify myself as a white cisgender gay male.
Can you share with us a little about your story? Like, how did you discover that you actually gay?
My story goes I'm a late bloomer, as I like to label myself, with some fun and some humor around it. So I came out when I was 30 years old. It took me a while, probably because of the cultural situation where I grew up. So I grew up in Portugal, which is a very, heavy religious country, a very, very old state. Even though I grew up in a very loving home and I always had friends that were gay and I would interact with the gay community, with the lesbian community, there was still something inside in me that I would reject myself to accept as gay. And some may say persistent, others may say stubborn, depending on how the moon is. But yeah, it took me the time to get there and to fully accept myself.
When did you actually realize that you are gay?
When I realized, I want to say really young age, where I remember walking with, I think it was with my sister sometime out of school, and I remember, saying, oh, I can see if a man is pretty, but I cannot see if a woman is pretty. The other part is I couldn't accept it. So there was an internal rejection of that. So I was always trying to hide it.
Like, what would you say was the role of pornography in your discovery, but also as a teenager, that knowing that they might be gay?
Yeah. So pornography was, first, it was that forbidden fruit of that knowledge I was not supposed to have. And as a kid, I wanted to have it. And I remember, accessing it with friends. So this was the 80s in Portugal. So we're talking about magazines that were either smuggled from other friends or something. I remember having access to straight porn. And again, I would focus on the male side of the porn that I remember vividly. And pornography always had that escape of that forbidden fruit. I think I would hide it. Partially with shame, and I think it was associated with me being gay, and also it was not accepted to even have access to pornography, let alone consume it in my household, in the country itself.
What did you do to consume it?
At first, when I was younger, like friends at school would have access to it. I don't know how, either older brothers, older cousins, or there would be newsstands that would sell things that were supposed to be only sold for adults. That was the immediate access. And then I remember being more in my late teens, where there was something called internet that you dial in. Modem, and this is already now early 90s. I remember having a project at school about internet, and I've always been super techy and associated with tech. I work in tech today. I'm a computer science major. So technology was always part of my day-to-day life, and I had access to internet when no one else had. In my group of people at school, and that was when I started immediately getting access for free, and when I was not supposed to, through the internet as well. And this was not even on websites, so it was even before websites existed.
What was the conversation you had inside your head based on the community you were growing up?
At least the conversation I did, which of course has to be a process of the community, but also the stories I was telling myself, it was not a good thing. So I would either go to hell, or I would be, labeled as an outsider. There was no safe space in my mind. So in my intellect, I could not equate being gay and being, safe, either at school through bullying, or disappointing my parents, disappointing my friends. So there was this huge fear of I'm gonna die alone, if I would ever become gay. And this was also at the time, the religion had a big aspect about quote unquote going to hell because I would be gay. So all of that made me put, big X's on it, like, no, I cannot be this, and I would fight it. And it was so ingrained in so much that if I fast forward, from my 7-year-old to 30, where I'm no longer identified with the religion I grew up with, I live happily within the gay community. I leave Portugal. I live in cities like London and New York. And I would stay in Barcelona and Berlin, and I would still not come out as gay.
It brings me to my next question, which is, when did you tell your parents that you are gay? And also, how did they react?
So I was already on my early 30s. And I think I didn't took much long when at least when I said to myself, I am gay and I'm proud to be gay. I was an adult back then. So that's why I would say my story is, I want to add in that context. And I decided I pay my taxes, I'm vaccinated, I don't hurt anyone. I've been 30 years in the closet, no more. So I had a sit down with my mom. So she still is my only living parent at this time. I had a conversation with my mom about it, about the before and after. The result was she was surprised, but I decided to tell her, particularly because I was already telling to those very close to me, my sister, close friends, loose friends. So that's kind of where it happened. But I started coming out at home with my chosen family and biological family. There were some process, so other impacts of not feeling safe to come out was also at work. So I work for a big tech company that is super, super LGBT friendly and ally. And even though I would have senior executives that are part of the LGBTQ community, there was still some ingrained that I could not, I wouldn't feel, not, the word is not be safe. I think there was still the word shame around it, especially with work. So that had impacted me too, until I broke those chains too. And then slowly, join the LGBTQ group and my company, and that alone felt like another process of coming out. And why do I bring this up is, if this is something that it's not, first, it shouldn't be a big thing. I love when sometimes I hear those thought-provoking comments, which is like, yeah, they make sense. Like, straight people don't come out. Like, why do gay people have to come out? The point there, Michal, is it impacted even my work, me feeling safe at work, me delivering at work. It impacted me being in a committed relationship, and also not feeling my true self around friends, someone that I trusted, but not coming out to them. And not just that my chosen family, and by that I mean my friends, but also my biological family, not being there fully. It just means you don't feel safe, and there's a lot of after effects for it, in particular around mental well-being and a lot of mental illnesses.
Thank you for sharing all that. And how do you support today the LGBTQ plus community?
So this was something, and I consider myself an activist and allyship. That was also part of my process to make sure I belong also in this community and in many communities out there. I like to do volunteering. I like to speak up. And even, for example, at work, I'm out at work. So I support, I can do mentorship at work around the LGBTQ community and talk about my story, even coming out when I was 30. I sit at a board of an LGBTQ association in San Francisco, where we're currently based on, to help the community there. And there's one thing, I also volunteer a lot with the Trevor Project. And this is something I guess might be a good to call out, even just knowing what their mission is. And for those that don't know, the Trevor Project supports supports LGBTQ youths that are going through suicide ideation. It's tough. I had friends who had gone through suicide ideation. Seeing the stats of what it's happening, and those are just US stats. They're scary, they're heartbreaking. What our youth goes because they don't feel safe. It's, I get a little palpitations going on. Being able to give back to, the Trevor Project as a volunteer it's something, it's very, very humbling. And I feel responsible to our youth. Like, what are we doing to our youth? The LGBTQ plus youth, they're at risk when compared. Everybody's at risk, right? But they're definitely unfortunately, on the top at risk in terms of suicide ideation. And it's very humbling to be able to give back to that community.
So in the description, we're going to link to the Trevor Project. So parents and also people who wants to look and reach out to support can do that.
Yes. And not just for the youth, for everyone. There's tons of resources there that you can definitely support your youth, regardless how they identify, regardless if they know what they identify with, which is very, very important. And be able to create that safe space at home. I think it should be part of every parents must do.
We're going to link in the description. We're going to post a few websites that I find very helpful for parents and for youth to explore their identity and how they can support their children. This brings me to my last question to you. As parents are watching this, what will be your advice or one tip you can share with them of how they can support their children as they are discovering or exploring their identity and also their sexual orientation?
Sure. What I would offer is your actions matter. Your inactions matter. For me, a concept of parenting is, it's unconditional love. And the opportunity to create an amazing, human being out in the world, or help create and transform, a human being into an amazing person that will make this world a better place. That's where I'm coming from. Your actions matter as a parent. So think about allyship, whether if there's comments, whether you know it or not, or even when the things that you don't say or don't do. Are you being welcoming to all? Not that you need to have, be part of a network around LGBTQ community, but if you're not, be open and be vulnerable with your kids. Like, it doesn't matter, I will love you regardless, because I'm assuming that's the intention, regardless how your kid identify, what their sexual orientation will be too, gender, sexual orientation. I think all of those are key things. Just create a space where they have the time and space to feel safe and be themselves, so they can actually grow up to be amazing adults that can impact other adults and other kids out there too.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Nuno, so much for being here today and sharing your stories and how you support others and really bring more light to the world. Thank you.
My pleasure.